is everybody? Why am I all alone here in the big church building? Good morning. Pastor David here, coming to you through a video from our church basement. How are you doing today? Do you feel alone? Do you feel the cold of midwinter this January? We just finished celebrating Christmas and New Year's, where we remember that Jesus came into the light as the light of the world. Do you have a hard time finding the light? Do you have a hard time focusing on the light? This morning I invite you to get into the light, which we find in the Word of God. Do you find yourselves alone, isolated, not knowing what to do with yourselves, not knowing where God is? Is God doing anything? If that is your experience, that is very common even for God's people themselves. And I'm sure even now, especially with COVID isolations, you're not the only one that feels that way. Even people, the prophets of the Bible, were going through very difficult times where they said, "Where is God? What is going on?" And they just wanted to give up. One of these mighty prophets we find was the prophet Elijah, and we read about him in 1 Kings chapter 19 of the Bible. Elijah was a man who had experienced tremendous miracles, great works of God within his ministries. But he had also seen the worst of things, where God's people, many of God's people had been killed through the powers of the day. So here he finds himself running from his time, running from his circumstances. And he runs away and he's hiding in a cave somewhere. And here we read, "And the word of the Lord came to him and asking, 'What are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here?'" God is asking him what he's doing. He had been running from his circumstances. And here is what his reply was. He says, "I have been very zealous for the Lord Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenants, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me as well." These were the circumstances that Elijah found himself in. And God is coming to ask himself, what are you doing? Why are you hiding in a cave? Elijah thinks he has all the right reasons why he would be doing this. But long story short, as you read on in chapter 19, God is telling him to go back. Go back to what you were called to do. What has God called you to do? Do you occupy with what God has called you to do? Perhaps to encourage someone? Do you ask, is God still at work? Where is God? See, Elijah thought that it was all done. It was all over. But here's where God is speaking to him in verse 18. He says, "I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal." Baal was the idol that most people were worshiping in this day. God is reminding Elijah that he is still at work. And while Elijah is sitting here in a cave, depressed, feeling sorry for himself, just considering and focusing on the bad circumstances of the day, God comes and tells him to go back what he had been called to do. Do you still occupy doing what God has called you to do? let me assure you that just like back in those days, God is at work today. Let us join his team. Let us join his occupation in continuing to bring the message of salvation, the message of hope. Encourage one another even as we see the day approaching. God is not finished yet with you, with me, or with the world that we live in. God continues to be at work. So let us join him and continue to do his work of ministry until we see him face to face. Blessings to you, brothers and sisters, today.